Creating grids and cards in Framer can sometimes be a little bit challenging. And the challenge is you want to have cards that are consistent looking, so equal in height, and they always take up the height of the biggest card element. So everything is responsive and adapts to any changes that are made to the content, and the outside grid also always adapts to the height of the cards. So for example, if we have a longer headline here for our first card, as you can see, the other two cards adapt and take up the same height, so everything looks perfectly consistent. Now you might be tempted to work with fixed height settings for either the cards or the grid, and that might work for static content, but as soon as any changes are made, and for example, the text of the first card once again changes to something shorter, and let's say the second card gets a longer title over 3 lines, yeah, you can't really work with any fixed values because things won't be responsive that way. So in the first part of this tutorial, we'll look at the potential problems you can run into when creating these kinds of grids and cards and some of the underlying issues. Because honestly, Framer acts sometimes a bit inconsistent when it comes to creating grids, and there are a couple of things to be aware of. In the second part, we will rebuild these cards right here and set them up in a grid so that they are perfectly responsive and equal in height, and also have this subtle hover animation. Now let's first tackle some of the potential problems you can run into when creating these kinds of cards and grids. I've prepared this super simple setup right here, where we have a card that is basically just a layout with some padding applied and a headline inside of it. Now if we duplicate this card 2 times with Command D and selecting our cards, hitting Shift A to create a stack, turning this into a grid with 3 columns in one row, we end up with this setup right here. And when inspecting the grid, we can see for the height values that the height is set to fit, and under advanced, we have the height set to fill container. And for the cards themselves, the height is set to fill or auto and fill. And when making changes to our headline, let's make another line, all the other cards adapt accordingly and change their height as well and take up the full height of the grid, which is perfect. This is most of the time the desired behavior. So if we create grids and end up with this combination of settings for our grid and card, we get this desired outcome of equal height cards that adapt to the content inside of them. The only problem is you don't always end up with this scenario, depending on how your cards are set up, how your grid is set up, and whether you start out with cards and add the grid later on, or you start out with the grid and add the cards later on. Yeah, things can become a bit messy. So let's look at another example where we start out with a grid. So I just hit Shift G to draw out a grid like so. And let's get rid of these 3 frames right here to just style the first one and duplicate it later. So we can quickly set the fill to white and add a headline inside of it. Let's change the frame to layout so we can apply some padding. And also set the headline to fill width. Now we can already see the problem that the grid is set to a fixed height because we just drew it out by hand and Framer took that to be the height of the grid. And our card is actually taking up more space, especially since we chose 2 rows at the moment, 2 rows, 2 columns. You can see the card gets cropped at the top. So yeah, this is a problem immediately. Let's try to fix this by duplicating our card 2 times, changing the columns to 3, rows to 1, and setting the height instead of the fixed value to fit content. Let's try to change some of the content, so we add another line of text here. And as you can see, the cards don't really adapt. This first card should get bigger because it has 96 bottom and top padding applied to it, but it just loses that padding. And if we were to add even more text, finally the text would get cropped. So yeah, the cards are currently not responsive, and this is a problem. And even though we added the height to fit, if we select the grid and go to advanced, we can see that Framer set the height of the grid to fixed 200 after all. And if we think back at our previous scenario, we had the grid set to fit height, and under advanced we had fill container actually. And the card was set to fill. Can quickly check that. Yeah, card is set to fill and the grid is set to fit. And if we try now to go to advanced and change the height to fill, we can see that this value is actually grayed out. So there's no chance for us to recreate this previous scenario. Yeah, and that's the part when dealing with grids and cards that honestly can be a little bit frustrating because, yeah, the behavior seems a bit inconsistent sometimes. But luckily, there's another way to create responsive and equal height cards that works a bit more reliably. And if you ever find yourself in a situation where either your grid or your card is set up to a fixed height value, you can go this second route and follow these steps. So this is the second scenario we can try to achieve, and it's the more reliable one. So if there's anything you can take away from this video, is that you can try to set up your grid and card in that way. So let's look at this. The grid should be set to fit height, and under advanced, we also set the height to fit. And the card itself should have a height of 100% relative. And if you set this up, you will notice that the grid will be changed to a fixed height again. And you have to go back to the grid and set it back to fit height. Let's just look at this real quick. So we have our grid set to fit height, which is fine. And under advanced, we also set the height to fit content. Then we select our 3 cards and set the height to 100%. And as you can see, Framer spits out this message where the parent layer has been set to a fixed height again. So we can go to the parent layer, which is the grid, and set the height back to fit content. And now you should be left with equal height cards that have the desired behavior of adapting their height and being perfectly responsive. So if we try this out, yeah, things are looking pretty good. Yep, that's perfect. Let's look at another example where we have a pre-built card component like so. And we want to turn this into a grid, so duplicating it 2 times, selecting the cards, hitting Shift A, changing the type to grid, 3 columns, 1 rows. And inspecting this, we can see that our grid is set to fit, advanced set to fill container, but the card itself is set to a fit height. And if we end up with a grid like this, where the card is set to fit instead of fill, there's actually no chance for us to achieve this first scenario where the card is set to fill, because if we try to achieve that, Framer will just set the parent once again to a fixed height value. And if we change that to fit, the advanced settings will change to 200 height, and once again the fill container is grayed out. So once again, we have to resort to our second scenario, which just works all of the time. So to reiterate, the grid has to be set to fit height, advanced also set to fit, and the card to 100% relative. So the grid is already set to fit height, and under advanced, we also set the height to fit content. Now selecting the cards, we change the height to 100%. Go back to the grid and set it to fit content. And there we go. As you can see, the cards adapt perfectly now. So to recap this one more time, either you end up in this scenario 1 right away, or if any value is different than that, you should try to achieve scenario 2, which has these settings. And don't forget to change your grid back to a fit value once Framer decides to set the parent container to fixed. And yeah, you should be good to go, and these settings should work reliably. Now, with all of that in mind, let's create these beautiful cards right here from scratch. Let's draw an outer frame for our card by hitting F and just drawing a frame like so, changing the fill to white, adding a border radius of 30, and we can immediately create a layout. Set distribute to start for now. We will change this later. Gap can be set to 0, and padding we can use 8. Next is our image, and for images it's typically a good idea to have an outside container for the image, just to be more flexible, and especially if you want to animate the image, it's always a good idea to have an outer frame for the image. So we draw our image container like so. By the way, we can name this to card. This is our image container. Set the width of the image container to fill. And we also need a border radius, which has to be a little bit smaller than the outside border radius. So not 30, but something less, like 24, so that we can get like an even border around. Now we also apply a layout to our image container, and the settings don't really matter in this case because there will only be one element inside of it. So let's draw another frame inside of the image container, which will be our actual image. Set the width to fill and the height to 250 pixels. And now let's go back to our image container and set the height to fit. Let's actually upload an image to our image frame so that things look a little bit more nice. And we can also remove this fill from the image container. Now, next is a icon beneath the image. So for that, I'm using this Mono Shapes icon pack from Sana, which you can find in the Framer marketplace. And just give it 36 pixels of width and height. For the color, we just want this beige color right here. Let's just quickly use this icon. Next is our headline. So I hit T and type in headline for now. Using my arrow keys, I place this beneath the icon and apply my predefined heading style. And now lastly, we just need this small learn more button at the bottom of the card. So we can just duplicate our headline and remove this text style. Choose another font like this one. Change the size to 1 rem, add some letter spacing, and also a text transform uppercase. To create the border bottom, we create an outside stack for this headline. So I just hit Shift A to create a stack. Hit Shift A once again to set the width to fit content. And then add some padding bottom, like 10 pixels. And the border bottom. Now this headline actually should be set to fill the width, which is the default for text, so that it can take up the width of the outside container. And yeah, now that we have collected all of our elements, we just have to fix some of the gaps and the layouts. Now thinking about our layout, we want to have the image, icon and headline be positioned always towards the top of the card, and the learn more button should always stick to the bottom of the card. And there should be the space between the headline and the learn more button should be variable. So to achieve this kind of layout, we need to have the space between property for our outside card. And the image, icon, and headline all need to be in one stack, and the headline needs to be the second element so that we can apply the space between layout to these two different stacks. So let's do this. Add the image container, the icon, and the headline to a stack for themselves by hitting Shift A. I can call this image icon and headline. And now we can select the card and set the layout distribute to space between. And this is looking pretty good. Now there are just some spacings we have to fix. First of all, we want this spacing right here to be 32 pixels, but the spacing between the icon and the headline should be smaller. So I need to create yet another stack for these two elements and change this gap to 16. Let's quickly make the card a little bit bigger. The headline also shouldn't go quite as close to the edge of the card, so we can use this stack, icon and headline, and apply some more padding to the left and the right. We already have 8 from the card itself, so we can use another 16 to have 24 in total. Now we only need to fix the padding of the button right here, which we can, by the way, rename to learn more. Now this needs some padding on the bottom, but also on the top, because we don't want it to be too close to the headline. You have to be a little bit careful there when you're using the space between property, because this can actually go quite close together. So let's select our button and create an outside stack for it by hitting Shift A. Call it button wrapper and apply some padding to the button wrapper. So 48 at the top, 16 to the left and the right, and 24 to the bottom. So this is looking pretty good. Now we can set the card height to fit content. And what happens now is that the layout gets changed back to distribute center. So let's change this back to space between. And that's it for our card, except that we can turn it into a component that we can call card. And let's create some variables for it. For the image, and the headline should also be a variable. And the icon also. This button text actually can stay the same. It can always read learn more. So we don't need to create a variable for that. And yeah, that's about it for our card. And we can duplicate it 2 times. Let's quickly change the image of the second and third card. And selecting our cards, we can turn it into a grid. We can also increase the gap a little bit and set the max width for the grid to 1200 pixels. Now inspecting the grid and the cards, we see that the card height is set to fit. And if that happens, there is no chance for us to achieve this first scenario we talked about earlier. So we can go straight to the second one and set up our grid and cards like so. So the grid is set to fit height and fit content under advanced, cards to 100% height, and going back to the grid, setting back the height to fit content. Now we can test the responsiveness by adding some more gibberish text right here. And as you can see, the other 2 cards adapt, and the space between the headline and the Learn More button increases, and the cards stay perfectly consistent in height. Now, as a last finishing touch, we can create a subtle animation for our card so that the image slightly increases on hover and there appears this small arrow button at the top right. So let's go into our component and create a hover state. Now for the image animation, this one is actually super simple. We can just select the image and add a scale transform of, say, 1.1. So it already looks like this. Now the animation I don't love so much, so we can change it to a ease transition of 0.4 seconds, which is fine. Yeah, that looks a little bit more polished. And as for the circle with the arrow button, I have prepared a circular frame of 36 pixels width and height with a phosphor icon inside of it. So super simple layout. And I select the primary variant and just paste the circle icon there. Change the type to absolute. Increase the set index to 2 just to be sure. And then anchor it to the top right. So let's get rid of this pin at the bottom. Instead, do top 24 and whoops, right 24. And now in the primary variant, we want the circle with arrow to have a opacity of 0. So decrease this to 0. Then select it in the hover state and change the opacity back to 1. And that's it. We can preview this and see our subtle animation right here. So that's it for this tutorial. I really hope it was helpful to you. I will leave a link to the remix file in the description so you can inspect everything and play around. So take care and see you in the next one.